evening and welcome to the March 27, 2023 work session of the Mayor and City Council. Tonight we have one topic for discussion. We are going to talk about the parking permit program and where we're at and maybe what direction we're going to take it. And I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant City Manager, Tom Lonergan-Seeger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members of the council. Over the last several months, I've had the pleasure of working very closely with several city staffers on a comprehensive review of all the various existing parking permit programs in the city of Gaithersburg within both residential and commercial districts. As you may know, the parking programs within the city have been implemented over many years, typically with complaint-driven origins, especially in residential neighborhoods, and generally lack formal criteria for their establishment. The ad hoc committee with which I was working took a good look at the hodgepodge of programs, and representatives of that committee are here tonight to present an update on their efforts, along with some potential recommendations for your consideration. You'll note that an option we did not consider was the elimination of any of the parking pass programs. What we did do was evaluate the current programs and identify ways to potentially standardize and improve them. Joining us tonight to present are Neighborhood Services Division Chief Kevin Roman and Economic Development Manager Sharon Disk. But before I turn it over to them, I'd also like to thank and acknowledge other members of the ad hoc committee who have been working on this initiative and are with us tonight, including Lieutenant Chris Vance, Sergeant Lester Rice, Business Systems Division Manager Brian Helms, and Engineering Services Division Chief Brian Fields. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, guys.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, parking. We'll start right into the presentation. For context, here we show some of the challenges that staff are facing internally due to the various types of permitted parking that is being administered by different departments. Ideally, we would like to get these various programs centralized and in a central location to better serve our residents. So this chart identifies the 5 different types of permit programs in the city, the locations where they apply, and the departments that administer them. We'll take a deeper dive on each of the existing programs. I'll start with the residential program and then turn the presentation over to Sharon for the remaining 4. Way back in 1977, a Supreme Court case, Arlington County Board versus Richards, determined that a community could reasonably restrict on-street parking to commuters to reduce air pollution and also to benefit the quality of life of residents by reducing noise, traffic hazards, and litter. Accordingly, the city's residential permit program was established shortly after in 1979. The ordinance provided the city manager could consider creating permitted areas upon the receipt of a petition from residents. At that time, once the petition is received, several factors would be taken into consideration, including the effect on the health, safety, and welfare of the residents, the difficulty or inability of residents to secure parking in their area, and also the desire of the residents in the area to institute a permit parking program. And then also they would look at the average number of vehicles parked on the streets during certain times compared to the total number of available parking spaces on the street. Here we have an aerial map that shows all the residential permit parking areas. The locations are indicated by the plotted markers, the red plotted markers. The markers represent 9 areas in which approximately 300 homes are eligible for permits. So in the city, we have about 28,000 dwelling units. Therefore, just about 1% of the residential homes fall within the restricted areas. I would say this map indicates that the city currently has pockets of parking challenges, but that we don't have a widespread parking issue. Now we will take a look at the existing permitted areas. We have 9 areas currently. It's Bennington, Brighton East, Brooks Avenue, Deer Park, Kentlands, Lee Street, Meme, and Market Street, and Observatory Heights. We will take a quick look at each area and provide the year the permits were established and the underlying cause to have parking permits. Before we do that, we do have in those 9 areas, there's 5 different types of restrictions. The restrictions range from no parking at any time or only on certain days and times. Each restriction type was determined by the circumstances that were impacting the area. So in Bennington, the area was permitted in 2006. The request was received because there's a stick of townhomes right here, if you can see, that did not have any parking. They didn't have a driveway, they didn't have any parking spaces in front of their homes, and they didn't have any garages. So in 2006, we dedicated a couple of spaces on Long Draft for their use. Brighton East. The areas were established in 2005, between 2005 and 2008. The green area here is Summit Hall Road, and this area right here is Brighton. These areas were restricted due to the use by the high school students, where Gaithersburg High School is just to the north. The students would park along that street during the weekdays and during school hours to avoid paying the parking charges over at the high school. The red areas here, these areas were reserved for parking because we were seeing spillover from the adjacent communities on West Deer Park. A lot of these are over here on this side are condominiums, and they have internal parking. When the internal parking gets full, and there's no other places to park, they find the free parking across the street and they park there. I did want to note is just that West Deer Park runs from North Frederick Avenue 355 to Muddy Branch. So only the westbound lane is permitted. The eastbound lane is open parking for open parking as long as your vehicle moves every 48 hours and is then maintained in a good condition. The blue lines here is this is Brooks Avenue, and this is Russell Avenue, and this is Park Avenue. This was the first area in the city that was ever permitted back in 1980. The area was impacted due to commuters taking the MARC train. They'd come and leave their vehicles, jump on the train, go to work, and then come back to retrieve their vehicles later. The red line area is Lee Street. There's only 5 homes here that needed secure parking. And then also there's an area, that was cut off just north of this Lee Street area, again on Park Avenue. Both of those areas were established due to the spillover from the apartment parking. This looks like Skittles. This is at Deer Park and Observatory Heights. There's numerous types of restrictions due to visitors, again, to the high school, to St. Martin's Church. They were impacted in Hutton Street in Peony. And then also there's a commercial center here right at the end of Cedar Avenue that was impacting the residents. These areas were established between 2002 and 2014. This is in Kentlands. It's next to the mansion and the Arts Barn. There is one home here that does not have any, there's no driveway, no garage, and we made some parking spaces available for their exclusive use here. And that was done in 2002. This is another residential properties that are abutting commercial areas. This is the Market Street. East, there's a stick of townhomes that front the commercial area. We permitted these spaces between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. to restrict evening and overnight parking by visitors to the commercial area. And that was done in 2004. And lastly, we have a portion of Meme Avenue that has restricted hours on weekdays. That was established in 1986. I would believe that this was due to the commercial condos and the commercial properties adjacent to it, and possibly the fairgrounds just to the north. So a little bit of background on how we got here today. As I mentioned earlier, the first few areas of the city designated permanent parking were areas impacted by commuters parking in town to ride the MARC train. A few other areas followed as residents were impacted by visitors to commercial areas, the shopping centers, places of worship, and the educational facilities. So the program served its purpose and without incident. Then during the period of around 2006 to 2016, we started to permit areas being impacted by spillover parking by other city residents from neighboring communities. And that's when the question started to be asked, is this program efficient, effective, and equitable? So in 2017, we brought identified concerns to the mayor and council. And at that time, we received guidance to conduct some outreach, seeking feedback on potential modifications to the program. We sent out a survey to 522 homes, including homes within a permitted area, adjacent to a permitted area, and also areas that had recently requested permits. The response was, we had a very good response rate, and that survey was discussed again with the mayor and council in 2018. At that time, staff received guidance to come back to the mayor and council with a program for potential adoption. And then we earmarked the second quarter of 2020 to come back, but the pandemic threw us a curveball and that was shut down. And at that time, we actually saw a trend where the residents were contacting the city to remove restricted parking to allow more on-street parking during the stay-at-home order by the governor. So some of the concerns that we had previously identified is that we have no criteria to establish these permitted areas. We have equity concerns due to restricting public space for private use. We would like to establish, again, clear criteria that indicates that a parking problem actually exists and is not just a perceived problem. With the permits, issuing hang tag permits that don't expire and that they are not registered to the specific vehicle has led to a complete chaos with the permit management and enforcement purposes. We understand that permits have been traded and or sold and then displayed in vehicles that aren't eligible to participate in that program. So the results of the survey show that there is still overall support for the program and that we should implement modifications to better control the number of permits issued to a property. And it also showed support for a reasonable fee for the permit, and that residents understand that certain signage would need to be installed on any new areas implemented. Therefore, our suggestions to better manage permits moving forward would include restricting the number of permits issued to a property, annual renewals and fee for the permits, ensure the vehicles are registered to the subject property, and then also explore permit management software program to better track the issued permits. Let's see. Where did I get lost here? Okay. So enhanced enforcement would benefit the permitted areas to ensure compliance. Potential enhancements could include a new permanent management software program, as discussed, and also we could use technology that would make enforcement more efficient, such as license plate readers if we ventured into digital permits. We do envision that existing permitted areas would be grandfathered into the program, but they would need to comply with any changes to the permit requirements. And with that, we have okay, I'm sorry, I lost. We would like to establish clear criteria to show that a parking problem exists, that this could include staff performing several surveys on proposed areas. We would provide data that, those surveys would provide data on how much curb space on the street is consistently heavily parked during peak occupancy. And if the results meets a defined threshold, permits may be warranted. Again, back referencing the U.S. Supreme Court case mentioned earlier, Arlington County used versus Richards. Arlington County used the 75-25-60 rule to determine if the area was being impacted by out-of-area commuters. Basically, that rule states that if 75% of the available on-street parking spaces are occupied, and that 25% of those spaces are being used by vehicles from out of area, then the streets are considered to be crowded. The 60 refers to 60% of the residents in the area must be in favor of the permits. That said, Arlington just recently changed that requirement to 85-80. Basically, they removed the out-of-area percentage and upped the usage to 85% of the available spaces being used and 80% of the residents that would be in favor of the permits. We want to ensure consistency with the boundaries, making sure we don't permit areas of curb space that abuts commercial properties, city property, or undeveloped land. Potentially limiting the eligibility in the program to homes that are not governed by a final site plan, or only homes that front residential, collector, or local access type streets. So again,
Kevin, I'm sorry, can you just repeat that last part about
sure.
the eligible streets?
So we potentially limit the eligibility in the program to homes that are not governed by a final site plan. So, because generally when you have the conditions of a site plan, that parking is baked into that plan. Or homes that front a residential, collector, or local access type streets.
Thank you.
I think you're on 23, Kevin.
23?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Again, so, sorry about that. Our page numbers are different. The outstanding requests are on Duval Lane, the 300 block of Summit Hall Road, and Water Street. I would like to mention we also have previous requests from Rock Lodge Drive, Larkspur, and Jones Hill over off of Long Draft. With that, I will turn this over to Sharon to talk about commercial permit parking.
And residential typically is the only program people think of in Gaithersburg when it comes to parking, but we actually have several other, probably 4 total, parking permit programs that are not administered by neighborhood services. So commercial parking covers parking of employer vehicles in city-owned lots in Old Town. And each employer is eligible for a single permit, regardless of the amount of square footage they occupy or how many employees they have, but typically only if their location does not abut a private parking lot. So here, on this map, you'll see the city lots, and these are the areas where employers can use their single parking pass. So that's 1 permit for each eligible Old Town business. There's no cost. It is renewed annually, so these expire and we don't really have to worry about the transfer of permits over time. They can park all day in the time-restricted lots. They've got to display that hang tag, but the hang tag can be transferred between employees. And it's administered by economic development. About 70 businesses are eligible, about 40 participate. And I can tell you this, everyone wants more than 1 permit. They have to have a use and occupancy permit for each applicant. The eligibility is loosely defined. So in the past, there were businesses that did have their own dedicated private parking, but they were receiving permits. There is nothing in writing that defines participation in this program. It's more of a tradition. And as I mentioned, – generally, it goes to those that lack dedicated parking spaces. we're recommending that we adopt eligibility requirements and program guidelines. I know that's enlightening, but consider extending the issue period from 1 year to 2 years or automating the renewals, because it does become a rather onerous activity for not just the staff, but also for the applicants. The businesses typically are not turning over as frequently as you would see in, say, a rental housing neighborhood. We would like to see that the administration of this be merged with the residential permit parking. Often what we find is people who are eligible for permits don't even know where to go. It's more of a word of mouth between adjacent tenants in Old Town. And then evaluate increasing the number of permits per business and possibly adding a cost so that there could be either free or low cost for the first permit. Additional permits have an escalating price with a cap on that. Then we have the crossings, the apartment building. And this is a permit program that is defined by an agreement between the owner of the crossings and the city that reserves 100 spaces in the city-owned parking deck. When I say reserve, it means there are 100 spaces. Individual spaces are not identified for the crossings, so the crossings owner determines which tenants get hang tags. We really are ancient when we administer these things. There is no cost. In the agreement, the cost is defined as free, or if the city were to implement fees for the garage, then fees could be added to this program. Until that happens, these are free. They are renewed quarterly, and that is done by the city manager's office. The reason we're looking at quarterly in this case is because there is turnover of residential tenants that is more frequent. But the hang tag has to be displayed. The hang tag is provided by the city manager's office to the crossings management. Management there distributes the hang tags. Again, we'd like to see this program merged with the others. Consider automating the renewals. And then if we were to impose fees in the garage, we could impose fees for this program as well. And then we have our commuter parking permits. And this was a program that was conceived for marked passengers who might ride the train but leave a car in the city garage to then travel that last mile to their employer. The idea being we would make it easier for inbound marked riders to go to their Gaithersburg jobs. It's $35 a year, renewed annually. This allows the vehicle to park overnight in the city-owned garage. It is the only permit that allows that under the programs I'm describing. Again, it's a hang tag administered by the city manager's office, but at the moment, we have no active permits issued. Previously, about 6 per year. It might be a more popular program if marked ridership were higher. Right now, between the pandemic and the impact of work from home, ridership on the train is significantly less than it used to be. We merge it with the other program, consider automating renewals, and evaluate the program value. If we've only had an average of 6, is this a program that we should be providing? And lastly, we have temporary parking permits. These are for short-term needs.
Can I come in?
Please. This often relates to construction projects. For example, a condo building on Russell needed to rebuild their garage. So we provided temporary parking passes. It's done with the city manager's approval at no cost. We define the duration. We modify our hang tags, and they can park all day in the city-owned lots or overnight. Administered by economic development. It's not used frequently, but it is necessary. We've even used it for our own construction projects and construction crews that are working in Old Town on behalf of the city as well. I know this is repetitive. Maybe I'm trying to emphasize the point I want to get across. Merge the administration of this with the other programs. Establish guidelines. You know, there's another idea there. Consider automation of the applications and evaluate a possible fee structure, since this is often associated with commercial construction. And then we've repeated the slide from earlier just to, because who can remember under what legal authority each program is created or who administers those. So you can see we've got everything from the police, city manager's office, which could be economic development, or it could be Cindy Hines. We just spread the wonderful opportunity to administer parking every which way we can. And with that, we provided a few items for discussion. Of course, there are probably many others as well. Kevin, do you want to?
Well, I guess the discussion points again are we in line with the city priorities? Does it make sense to centralize the 5 different programs? We're looking for guidance on formalizing eligibility and the procedures. Thoughts on potentials to have the programs automated online, and we'd like to hear any other ideas that you may have. So with that, we'll turn it back over to the mayor and council.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I've been at this dais since '07, as has Ryan. Parking permit program has come up several times. The reason why it's not resolved at this point to everyone's satisfaction is because I don't know if there's a way to resolve it to everyone's satisfaction. It's a big topic to get your arms around because there's so many different neighborhoods and situations. They almost seem like one-offs everywhere you look. I like just in my on the surface, I like a lot of the recommendations from staff, grandfathering where there's already programs, creating criteria that's measurable and understandable for allowing new programs. I guess my question is the merging and automating. I love those ideas. What's our capability like right now to stand up like an online parking permit application and renewal? Do we have that? With our software that we're using now for planning and code or planning to use, where do we stand on that?
Well, I'll just broach that real briefly.
Brian, you're welcome to come up. I see you itching to come up.
So,
He was giving
back
me
in
the
the
look.
early on, we thought that EnerGov could handle such that program, but it was determined that that's definitely not the software package for it. So we would probably need to explore other options.
Brian, you want to add to that?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. It's nice to see everyone this evening. I look at this as 2 pieces. One is the actual issuance and like the renewal of the permits, but the other part is enforcement. Someone has to go out there and it has to be enforced. Otherwise, you don't have a program without enforcement. So while we could use some of our current tools like EnerGov or even our Parks and Recreation Management System to let people apply for the permits, the enforcement side is lacking in some of those programs. Kevin kind of mentioned earlier, if a decision is made to move forward with some type of technology here, please, as the enforcement agency, we would evaluate with them what the best way to handle it is. You can throw manpower out on the streets, that has a cost, or you might throw things like cameras on cars where they can just drive straight down and do OCR on the license plates. And so there's pros and cons to all that, and we'd want to evaluate that. But our existing systems don't have those enforcement capabilities. So if we went with an existing system, you're basically saying that you're going to throw money at probably more personnel resources.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Let me open it up to council members. Questions, comments. Jim, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I figured we would get to parking eventually. As a council member, the reason I'm even sitting on this dais is because I ended up coming into this room to discuss parking on behalf of my community. And as you all remember, it was quite a project. Let me start by saying I definitely agree that centralizing is a good idea, Sharon, so I'm definitely behind that. And absolutely, Kevin, the enforcement aspect is going to be key. Even with the existing ones, I know that we've at times felt like we didn't have enough bodies to help enforce the rules that were in place currently. In looking at some of the percentages and figuring out, like, how do we come up with these rules, one of the challenges that even came up back when the Victory Farm issue came up that I'm referring to, the area that you focus on and then determine the percentage, I think, will need to be discussed. If you think about in that situation when there was only a very specific part of Saybrook, for example, asking all of Saybrook whether that section should have permit parking versus having to apply it to the entire neighborhood, I think we'll need to be intentional in how we define an area that we're looking at versus, painting with a broad brush at a neighborhood level. So I think that's going to be incredibly important. I wanted to ask Kevin about the exempting site plan communities, particularly if you look at some of the challenges maybe that we're having in Old Town, and the possibility of when parking gets decoupled, like we're seeing with some of the condos over there, and if we're exempting areas that might have parking as part of it, and now it's spilling out, then we would need to have a permit program. So I'm wondering if that's not necessarily the best idea.
I would agree. I mean, we got to find the balance, and again, that's some of the best practices that are out there that other communities are using. Is if the property is governed by the site plan, then they wouldn't be eligible for parking permits, or we could look at just homes that front the streets, the local streets. That may be more equitable.
Okay. And then going back to my Victory Farm example, where that is a collector street, and under this suggestion would not be eligible to have people who are parking there
On Victory Farm?
Correct.
Yeah. A Victory Farm,
I'm just using it as an example. by the way.
right. I mean, but all the adjacent communities there have parking inside those communities. Saybrook has, their residential streets there. West End Run has their parking within their communities. Victory Farm, I don't think it would meet the recommendation for residential permit parking in either of the scenarios that I posted.
Okay. The only reason I bring it up is because the reason that the restrictions that are currently in effect, which of course are not permit related,
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the possibilities that was floated for that, was permits. And the issue wasn't with the local residents, it was the fact that it was being used more as a park and ride. So it was the residents from outside that were coming and parking it up and causing the quality of life issues.
Again, I think that was solved with
Yes, that issue has absolutely been solved. I'm just
with
kind of using that as an
restricted
example.
parking
Yeah.
hours. Correct.
I've had a couple of homeowners, and I think that their particular situations were on your list of pending issues with, I want to say it was Observatory Heights, and I think Brighton East, where those residents had, I think we've both had conversations with them over the past year. The commuter program, that's the first time I've heard of that commuter program, which is, I mean, it's a fascinating idea, and I can understand why with the commuting patterns changing that it's not being utilized. How were we even publicizing?
That was one of the issues I've found, because we had such divided management of these programs. It was almost by word of mouth. I discovered that program after being with the city more than a year. So I think if we were to centralize, then people would actually be able to determine via an application process what permits were relevant to their needs. We are not really managing our parking assets at all right now. That means, are we doing it professionally to optimize the use of the parking in a fashion that meets the needs of our residents or the employees that work here? And in fact, we aren't. Some of these programs are like a secret.
Yeah. I'd be curious if, things like micromobility are now more a better option than this.
I did not include the bike locker program. We have a few bike lockers and people do rent those.
Okay.
For example, that's another issue. We could be incorporating micro-mobility facilities into a grander transportation parking type asset, but we don't do that right now.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Lisa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Kevin and Sharon, for the presentation. It's interesting and challenging. I agree with the hope and desire to merge the programs and also to put in eligibility and guidelines to make it clearer what's what. A couple of questions I have. One is for the spillover, and one of the slides said it's one of the biggest problems is spillover, and I'm assuming from other neighborhoods. Is the issue that streets are clogged with too many cars and there's health and safety problems, or is the issue that the folks who are residents on that street want to utilize that space for themselves?
Well, I guess that's why we want to establish the criteria to make sure that there is a parking problem existing
Okay.
before we create any. But I can tell you that the spillover is being caused by several factors. It's the HOA enforcing their own regulations, where they may say that commercial vehicles are not allowed to park within the community, and their definition of a commercial vehicle is just anything with commercial writing on it. So they would not be able to park there, or they'd get a ticket or tow. Or maybe they're behind on their HOA assessments. A lot of times associations don't have fining authority. So what they'll do is they'll actually take away their amenities to either the parking permits or pool passes, what have you. Additionally, if someone's not on a lease, they're not named on a lease, they would not get a permit as well. And again, those condominiums on West Deer Park that we understand that's where the spillover is coming from, those were all parked at 2 spaces per unit. As you can imagine, there are probably several residents there that have more than two cars, so obviously 2 are in the community and the rest are going to find the free parking on the street.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And what's the penalty for violation? If say, Utopia happened and there were OCR readers and...
I believe it's a $60 fine.
Is this still correct? It is. Okay. And last question I have, was it said that the students at Gaithersburg have to pay for parking?
Back in that day, when it was first established, 2004, yes, they would have to pay by semester.
Okay, and that is no longer the case?
I believe it's still the case, but we'd have to check with the schools
Okay.
to determine.
Okay. And I said last question, that just wasn't true. This is going to be my last question. And for Tanisha, really, so for when the guidelines are established, will this be done under equities lens? Will Hazel be on this team to take a look at this as well?
We will certainly have Hazel at the table. The good news also is that, we have several staff members who have developed the ability and capacity to bring that equity lens to our discussions, including our very own Lieutenant Vance, who serves on this committee and has raised some of these issues already.
Okay, all right, great. That was the last one.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's worth pointing out that with the vast majority of these programs that we reviewed tonight, they were implemented at a time when not a single person on the current dais was on the dais. And, we can speculate how any one of us might have voted on any one of these individual programs back in, 2005 or 2002 or the 1980s. But I say that just because I think it's important to keep it in context. And I want to sort of emphasize the concerns about equity and the challenges here. I agree with pretty much all of the recommendations from staff in terms of going forward. I do think the only fair thing to do is to grandfather in those programs that already exist, at least the residential programs. But I do think it's important that we look at ways to centralize, professionalize, as Sharon said, and get a handle on what is a public, and let's be honest, it's a public asset. And the challenge here is the trade-off for the government when we are talking about conditions that reserve public assets for private use. And sometimes there's a case to be made to justify that, but there may be times when there is not, because these are taxpayer-funded streets, they are public streets, and designed for public parking. Again, I think it makes sense to grandfather in the existing residential programs while modernizing them in terms of eligibility guidelines. If we decide that some reasonable modest fee is appropriate, fine, or other reasonable limitations. Because when you started your presentation, you talked about the fact that as these programs have developed in a sort of ad hoc way since the 1970s, they represent 1% of all the homes in the city. The flip side of that is that 99% of the homes in the city do not have special rights to reserved parking on the public street near their home. And so again, we really need to think carefully about that equity piece of this. Some homes have driveways, some homes have garages, some homes don't. And so I just want to leave that thought out there and let you all know that that's an important issue to me. It's clear that that's an important issue to staff and some of the other council members here, probably all the council members here. But as we proceed, I think it's really important that we strike a balance in developing the criteria for future programs, while at the same time honoring the facts of what has been done in the past to create certain programs that already exist.
Thank you, Ryan. We'll go to Rob.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I can't find anything I disagree with.
All right. Okay, so everyone up here has had a chance to ask questions and make comments. I want to open this up now to the public. So this is what we'll do. We have attendees here. We have attendees on Zoom. We're gonna give people in the room a chance to testify first. Then we'll go to Zoom. We ask that you come up to the podium, state your name and address, or if you feel more comfortable, your neighborhood for the record. We ask that you keep your comments no more than 3 minutes. If you have more than 3 minutes worth of information to convey to us, use your 3 minutes and then send us the rest in writing to cityhall@gaithersburgmd.gov. It'll be considered just the same as oral testimony. When the timer beeps the first time and turns yellow, it means you got 30 seconds left and should wrap up your comments. Do we have anybody who'd like to speak tonight? Come on up, and whoever else wants to speak, just line up behind whoever's the first speaker.
Hello.
Hello. Just grab that mic and just point it toward
okay.
you. There,
Is that
perfect.
better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. My name is Joan Berkowitz. I live on Park Avenue in Old Town. And I don't know if the mayor and council received my email that I sent on Friday, so I might just read it to you right now, just in case you didn't have a chance to read it. I've lived in Gaithersburg since 1975. I was probably the instrumental one in 1980 that got the permit program started. And the way that evolved is that people that worked in Washington, D.C., that lived in outlying areas would drive to the closest place that they could possibly park to the MARC station to go downtown for their jobs. So that meant they would arrive really early in the morning, they would come home really late at night, and when I would go to work and my husband would go to work, we had no place to park our car when we came home in front of our own house. So I requested that the permit parking be changed to 2 hours and not allow all-day parking. And the city agreed and complied, and for that I was very thankful. Then the next thing that happened is that there was the whole bar scene up at Summit and Diamond at the Belt Building in the pubs there, where the happy hour crowd and the weekend crowd would come. They'd start parking at 4:30 in the afternoon, stay till 1 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes all day on the weekend. Again, I would come home from work, I would come home from grocery shopping, and there was no place for my car. So I requested that they have permit parking, permit parking only after 5 p.m. at night to avoid that happy hour crowd. And the city agreed and complied. And again, for that I was thankful. Next came the demolition of the 100 apartments at the bottom of Park Avenue and Brooks, and the replacement with 400 units. The parking in the garage there was a fee-paid parking. So naturally, people that are renting don't want to have to pay an additional fee for parking if they don't have to. So what did they do? They parked on Brooks Avenue and they parked on Park Avenue. The city's done a really good job of trying to evolve this whole parking issue. But then they did away with having guest permits. Then there was only one permit for household when there were 2 drivers. My next door neighbor at the time had 3 teenage drivers who lived with their father in Washington Grove, but spent the weekends with her. They couldn't park, there was no permit, so there were a lot of mistakes. I'll be real quick.
Joan, we have a bunch of speakers. I want you to send us the rest in writing. Thank you.
Okay, the biggest thing is lack of enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
That's the problem.
Thank you. Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Horlick. I live on Duval Lane, and I've lived there for 33 years, and I've worked in the city of Gaithersburg for 56 years. So I've seen Gaithersburg go from a small town with cows to the city that it is today. First thing that I want to say, it's not the people, it's the behavior. The parking problem is not the people, it's their behavior. Ms. Briley and Mr. Roman are well aware of the details on Duval Lane, and I won't go into any of those at this time. I believe that the root cause of the parking problems include insufficient parking spaces in the high-density communities, and we believe private sector rules against the parking of certain kinds of vehicles, like commercial vehicles, pickup trucks, and other vehicles. As I say, I've lived on Duval Lane for 33 years. Our problem didn't start till relatively recently, maybe the last 3 or 4 years. It was sudden, it was dramatic. Another possible cause, as was outlined earlier, is the lack of standards. And I applaud the city for looking at developing those standards. We have a unique circumstance that at the opening of our street, there's parking by permit only. And recently, with the help of Kevin Roman, we've gotten no parking on the circle. That was dangerous because of vehicles trying to negotiate the circle. So we have limited parking on our street. Some of the issues are people parking one car, moving it, putting another car in its space, occupying the same place on our street for as much as a month. That's a problem. People come and do maintenance, parking on our street. So, late night parking. People come, they nest on our street, and residents, single women coming home after dark, can find no parking on the street. Evidence of issues could be the number of tickets that have been issued by the city. And I want to conclude by thanking Neighborhood Services, Parking Enforcement, the City Police, and Ms. Briley for their help in solving the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Maria Rose Kane. I live on Rock Lodge Road, and very similar to that, we've lived there for over 30 years, and it was a very sudden situation several years ago when all of a sudden the street was overtaken. Larkspur Lane, which is a very small road that doesn't have any houses on it, all taken by cars all the time. The Larkspur part became a very safety hazard. You couldn't see to turn on or off of the street. That was given no parking very quickly. And what had happened was Villa Ridge changed their parking situation. And so even though they had a lot of empty parking spaces, people were parking over across the street in our area. And I was listening very attentively to what Mr. Spiegel had to say about the equity issues about it and about this being a public asset. But for the people in our neighborhood, we can't park over in Villa Ridge. We can't park on Girard Street. There's nowhere else for us to park. So originally, the city was going to make the first part of the street no parking to try and discourage people from doing that. When the signs went up, well, it was just from 1 in the morning till 5 in the morning. When the signs went up, it went through the whole thing. Most of the houses in our neighborhood have double wide driveways, and so they could deal with it. We don't, and all of a sudden it became an issue. We had 3 drivers, 1 driveway, and we couldn't park overnight. We can't have overnight visitors. So we were told that this was a temporary thing until parking permits came in place. This was back in 2017. I came and talked about this exact same thing back before COVID when this happened. We're still waiting for parking passes or some resolution so that people can park overnight, or we could have visitors without having to go to the police station or go to the city to get a temporary pass. So we kind of ended up in limbo when COVID hit, and so I'm just here to say, please, it would be great if we could get some sort of resolution. My daughter has now moved out because of that, so we're down to 2, but we do a lot of moving our cars around. So thank you very much for that, but in our place, there is nowhere else for us to park except on that one street.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Councilman. My name is David Anderson. I live at in Whetstone Run, right across the street from the Harriet Tubman Elementary School just built, and I mean right across the street. Anything happens there, I know about it. First, I want to make my comments very specific for my area, my house, okay? First, everything said for the last 2 people, amen, I agree with all of them, okay? What I am not concerned with is Victory Farm. All the comments you had on Victory Farm, I don't see Victory Farm as it's working now as a problem. When it comes to letting kids off, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have kids. And I don't access the streets during those times. So that's not a problem for me. I'll leave that for people who think they have a problem with that. Okay, so that's not anything what I'm concerned with. My concern is what Mr. McNulty had said about what's the scope of the permit parking, because my real problem is that scope, okay? At the entrance of Whetstone Run, virtually all the cars there are spillover from Via Ridge, Newport Estates, and the like, almost all of them. To be honest, I'm not really concerned with that. They are sedans, SUVs, and they maintain the character of a residential neighborhood. But if that changes, then I want to be able to have a small section for permit parking. Whetstone Run doesn't want permit parking all down there. They don't want it. And there's enough of them that don't want it. It means they could hook me for the problem. Okay? So it'd be nice if the entrance could have permit parking if you can't fix the problem. The problem I have is not parking per se. The problem I have is commercial vehicles are starting to park in front of my house. I had a street sweeper parked in front of my house all through the holiday season, okay? iRoof USA is now, with their ladders on their trucks, is now parked nightly in front of my house, okay? It detracts from the residential flavor of the neighborhood. It's not the twice a day kids going to school. It's not any of that. That's not a problem. I wish you would redefine a commercial vehicles as any vehicle of any size, because usually they're under the size limit of the current definition, that not to park in a residential area if it has advertising on it, or if it has ladders on it, or and obviously a dump truck or something, okay? That would help my problem.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Buenas noches. Good evening. My name is Oliver Fajardo. I am a 14-year resident of Brighton East. I am here today to express concern over the use of Summit Hall Road as an overflow parking lot for residents in the surrounding area. Most days you can find a handful of cars that are parked for 48 hours at a time, the legal limit. What this means is our driveways have been completely blocked, and homeowners cannot leave their homes until these cars were moved or towed. It means my children have to wake up in the middle of the night because cars are circling around trying to find parking. And it means that I am responsible for picking up trash when bottles are thrown outside on the sidewalks and grass area. A few months ago, my wife even took a broom to clean the street. I'm here along with my neighbors to ask the city to consider the proposal to issue parking permits for the residents of Summit Hall Road between West Deer Park and Brighton Drive. Issuing permits will help ensure the safety and accessibility of our street. We enjoy being part of this neighborhood and community that want to keep our streets accessible to, at the very least, the homeowners living on that city, in that block. We've even had to, buy noise machines so my kids can sleep at night so they don't wake up. And I have 3 young kids, so please help us out. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is John Roddy. I live at 105 South Summit Avenue, and for the last 48 years, I've been your neighbor 2 doors away. I hate to disappoint you, but I like the permit process as it applies to me. I confine my remarks only to Hutton Street, part of the Deer Park neighborhood. We have a 20-year track record. When that process was established, it was done right the first time. It's worked very well. I'm happy with it the way it is. Please keep it that way. The people from St. Martin's and the high school students may have been a problem at one time. They're manageable now. Enforcement might be a little bit better, but it's manageable. Things are good. And the last thing I'll say is that you may hear more remarks tonight about high school students are an easy target. They sometimes do scatter some trash. It reminds me of a line from a Broadway show that predates most of you. Why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Lori Galetto. I live on the 300 block of Park Avenue, specifically the section that was mistakenly cropped from the overview. I've lived on Park since 2011, and I'm attending this evening because I wanted to make sure that the street I live on is represented, as it includes a significant section of the Brooks Russell Park section. I appreciate the acknowledgement that while it may be beneficial to standardize the program, it's not one size fits all. Park Avenue suffers from a lot of spillover from surrounding apartments, which already have existing designated parking options. I ask the council to please explore ways for the apartment complexes such as Park Station to more fully utilize their designated parking areas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Catherine Marinos, and I have grown up in Gaithersburg my whole life. I now have inherited my parents' house on Brighton Terrace, and I'm rapidly becoming very ashamed of the neighborhood that I live in. My street is not permitted, and there's been a lot of parking that's overcrowded, trash. I've seen a lot of actions that were a little suspect in my neighborhood over the last several years. And I'm not worried about the commercial vehicles that are in front of my house. I'm more worried about the cars that are being parked in front of my house. They're partying in the cars. They're keeping my elderly neighbors up at night. And it's been going on for many years, over the last 3 years since I've been there. So I would like to be considered for at least permit parking on Brighton Terrace, because it's just terrible. But I appreciate your...
Thank you. Just grab that microphone. Grab the mic. Perfect.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I am short, I don't know. But I live in, my name is Afi Bahadur, I live in Summit Hall Road, and we have lots of problem in that road, and we need the permit, for that road. Lots of people, they come over there, they leave their cars, I tell you, maybe 2 days, maybe 15 days, and they bring 3 cars, they don't live there, and I know one day they will kill me, because I go over there, I said, you cannot park here like that. Only 48 hours. One of them wanted to choke me, and I said, you kill me or, I kill you. You cannot park here. You don't live here. They said it's free road. City didn't tell us, what we have to do. We can park here. And I have a small business at home. Nobody can just come and they look, it's very, very hard. People, they come and they think it's garage. I hope one night, all of you come and see the Summit Hall Road at night time. It's just like a parking lot. It's like a garage. And none of them, they live there. I live with the elderly husband. Ambulance wants to come and take him, and they cannot come to the carport. And I talked to all of them. I said, don't stay here. At least, maybe one day. But they don't listen. They hit my car with the bullet, and police came and they said they didn't know. 2 months ago, they hit my car. I had to pay lots of money to the insurance because they say it's what they call it, I forgot, hit and run. And I paid, $500 to fix it. That's the 4th time. 4 times they hit my car and they ran away. And it goes against my insurance. It doesn't matter, they did or whatever. And we have lots of kids, on the street, and we don't want, something happen to them. At night time, you cannot believe that they have they holds the exhaust, and they make a noise, and you have to wake up and say what happened, I just have a nervous breakdown with all these people, they don't live here. Please give us a permit, at least, we can sleep, with no noise and no problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before you start, Lieutenant Vance, I see you taking some notes, because some of what we were hearing there, it goes beyond permit programs. Some of those are police issues.
Yes, absolutely. And what I would also recommend to everybody, please, if you see something happening in your neighborhood, especially late at night, please call the non-emergency number 301-279-8000. Please call that number. Or if you can't remember that, go ahead and call 911.
Yes.
And we'll come out and address that issue. I'm also looking into doing some check-on patrols in those areas in the overnight hours to also check into those things as well. But for everybody here, if there's anything that's going on in your neighborhood and you feel unsafe, please call the police and we'll come handle that.
Yes.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Please come on up.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carlos, and I live on Westdale Park and Dubai Lane. And by the way, I want to say I would really appreciate if you actually do that throughout the neighborhood on Westdale Park and Dubai.
Carlos, please address us.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, man. And I lived in Gaithersburg since 2014, and I guess I want to be short and say just a few things. I had emailed Kevin Roman before in the past, and I actually brought up a couple of things about the parking situation, which I think has gotten way out of control in the past 2 years. The spillover from Fireside condominium, I think is just too much. Vans and trucks, I usually work vans and trucks, or people come in, park their cars, live there, and then they, move the trucks, and they just kind of like switch from car to work vans or trucks, and that actually has made the parking really bad. I would really appreciate if you guys will consider doing parking permits on both sides of West Deer Park. I would think that will definitely help, because at this point, I think it's only westbound or eastbound, I'm not sure which direction, but if both directions have permanent parkings, I think that will help a lot. And then the last thing I have is, I previously talked to Brian Fields from Public Works about relocating some no parking signs possibly, because before COVID, there was a parking sign that got relocated in front of 312 West Deer Park to 316 West Deer Park, and that gave enough space for 3 cars to park there. And if you guys could look into that, I will believe through that West Deer Park, there's opportunities for several of those no parking signs to be relocated, since they're from a far distance from a stop sign. And I really appreciate this meeting. I've been looking forward to it for the past 2 years. So thank you all, and I hope everything works out for you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Brian, you can come if you want to respond to that. Come on up. You don't have to. I just want to make sure you. I just want to make sure you caught the comment. Okay, great. You're working on it. Great. Okay, please.
Good evening. My name's Edward Mastel. I live on Summit Hall Road in the 300 block, which is the one line that Kevin put up in his chart says an issue, but it didn't say what the issue is. The issue is we don't have a permanent parking, and that's because 6 years ago, 2 or 3 of our neighbors decided not to sign up for permanent parking. And at the time, and I presume it's still now, it's all or nothing. So if 80%, your 80-25 is upside down. Because right now, 80% on scientific measure of the vehicles parked on that 300 block of Summer Hall Road do not belong to the people who live there. Part of this, I know my unscientific measure is in the evening when I'm upstairs working, I can see the cars parking in front of my house or driving up and down the street. Usually, one car will park, the other one will come up next to it. The driver of the parked car gets out and gets into the second car, and they drive off someplace. Have no idea where they're coming from or going to. Consideration number 2. Some years ago, I was told that the city had an ordinance that said if a vehicle is parked next to your driveway, the bumper of that vehicle should be at least 5 feet away from the end of the driveway. So if this is my driveway, he better be 5 feet away. One night, a panel truck was parked in front of my house. His bumper was on my driveway. I called 911 because it was later at night. And eventually a county officer showed up. I think the reason he showed up is because on that panel truck was a placards on it that said radioactivity. What was in that truck? I have no idea. I have no problem with radiation, as long as it's, I've dealt with it for years. But the officer, when he showed up, he pulled out his little rule book and he said, there is no such ordinance that says you got to be 5 feet from your curb line. He said, big whoop. Okay, you guys gave me an ordinance from 3-4 years ago with that 5-foot rule. Quickie point. The other thing to consider is you can't see around those vehicles when I'm backing out of my driveway. I have, you take one quick look to Nothing's coming either direction. Thank God I got a rear view camera on the car, because sometimes I try to sneak out, zoom, here comes somebody there. So panel trucks, larger vehicles, they limit the view. It's a safety issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. I'm Augustina, and I'm also from 300 Summit Hall Road Block. So in the Brighton East picture that Kevin Ronan was able to show us, you'll see that it was red and yellow. And you'll see that the small strip that has no color, that's where I live, which means everywhere that was eligible for parking is no longer eligible, meaning my street is the only one. And so all the spillover comes into that street, and that's why we're all here, because we need permit parking. And just a lot of us might struggle finding parking tonight when we come home after this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Helen Ward, and I have lived in Gaithersburg all of my life, and the past 66 years on my street. For 55 years, we had no problem with parking, but the last 7, 8, 9 years, we get the overflow of Londonderry apartments parking on our street. Londonderry, to my knowledge, is not even in the city of Gaithersburg. The school bus in the morning cannot get up our street a lot of times off of West Diamond because of the overflow parking from Londonderry. The school bus will blow the horn, and one of my kind neighbors will come out and move their vehicle. It's not their vehicle that's causing the problem. It's the overflow parking at Londonderry Apartments, and they're not even in the city of Gaithersburg. I and several of my neighbors 5 or 6 years ago presented this problem to you all. Nothing has ever been done. We've still got the problem of Londonderry clogging up our street. They're halfway up the street now, parking, and the school bus cannot get in to come up the street to pick up the kids. I hope we can get something done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm here because I live on the White Street, and I know that it is, before the pandemic, we've been in a meeting where I think it was to be scheduling a permit parking for that street, but I know the pandemic just stopped everything, and we stopped. I know in the pandemic you can park any time, and you cannot, since you work from home, you can stay as long as you can. But now we have a couple cars that parks like for over 6 months, and they don't move in front of my house. Sometimes I have to pick up some trash, and I don't mind to do it, but the other day they just leave us a diaper and some kind of pills that I don't know, they were colorful, and I don't know what they were, and I was worried about if my kids just pick it up and I don't know where they are. And I thank you because I think the city is doing now it's visit my city, my street, that is leaving parking tickets on the cars that are not 3 feet apart. Even I took 2 tickets. Because I just park my car to don't let other cars block my driveway. But I pay my tickets, and sometimes the people think that we are putting the tickets, and I said, we are not doing that. It's the city because you are blocking our driveway. So if you keep doing this, and then maybe you add the permit parking to our street, it will be tenfold.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I go to Zoom, Chris Vance, one more. Wait, come on up just one more time. If anybody is to find, just speaking to the mic too.
If you have any issues that are ongoing and present, we don't want you to live with that. Call the police. We will come out. We will respond out. and handle that issue. Again,
What was
the
number?
Listen,
number
this is
is
not the time to yell out.
the number is 301
Okay.
279 8000. Okay, and if you can't remember that,
8,000.
yeah, or 911 if it's something that where your safety is at risk and you're concerned about something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I'd rather you call and it turn out to be nothing than you not call. Okay, that's what we're here for. We work 24 hours a day. We have patrol units working every day of the week. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, we are going to start looking at our Zoom crowd. Tech team, there's definitely some faces here that we don't usually see, so I want to make sure they know how. If they like to speak, I want them to know how to do it. So if you would play the instructional video, that would be great. Tech team? Okay.
Good evening. If you've connected to the meeting tonight via Zoom and you're on a desktop or a laptop and you wish to make a public comment, we can't currently see or hear you. What you need to do, please, is wiggle your mouse around and look towards the bottom center of your screen. You should see a raised hand button. Go ahead and click on that now for us, please. Alternatively, if you've connected in via telephone, you can press *9.
Thank you very much, Tech Team. For those on Zoom who'd like to speak, I do see a bunch of hands up now. You're not going to be able to see the timer, but you will perhaps hear the timer go off when you have the one beep when you have 30 seconds left. Otherwise, I'll just tell you when you're out of time.
The timer should be on the screen. They'll put it on the screen.
Chris said that he wasn't able to get it on.
Working? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Chris, or Tech Team, if you could bring up Liz Brandenburg, please. And Liz, once you unmute yourself, state your name, address, or neighborhood, go right ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. My name is Liz Brandenburg. I live on 7 Brighton Terrace. I've been a Gaithersburg resident since 1964 in various locations, but definitely when it was a cow town. Lots of changes. Brighton Terrace it doesn't really need permit parking. There may be some bad sorts that come by or make trashy things and stuff, but I just wanted to kind of check to be sure that how far you were expanding the permit parking, because our little street is kind of quiet and there's always going to be some bad sorts. But I just wanted to kind of find out whether or not there was any idea about expanding the parking permit into Brighton Terrace.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. I think that remains to be determined tonight. We're just sort of going over an overview of what the program is and what it can be, so we're not getting into specifics like that quite yet. But thank you for the testimony. Tech Team, if you could bring up Joanna Scott, that would be great. Joanna, once you unmute yourself, just state your name and address or neighborhood and go right ahead.
Hi, this is Joanna Scott, and I live on Summit Hall Road in the 300 block, and I have been a resident of Gaithersburg for 12 years now, and I just want to echo the concerns already reflected by my neighbors on Summit Hall Road, asking for some kind of intervention for permits for our street. I won't go through, I've seen many of the same things that my neighbors have seen, so I won't repeat those things, but I will share a couple of things that I think are different. One is that my own driveway has been blocked, 100% blocked, where I've had to call a tow truck. Couldn't get out of my own house because there was a car parked that blocked my driveway 100%. And I have a young child, so you can imagine had there been a medical emergency and I needed to get out, that would have been problematic. So have had that experience. And I also want to echo the safety concerns because there's so many cars parked on the street and they're cars of different sizes that I can't let my daughter ride her bike on the street anymore because the visibility behind the vehicles is so poor. If nobody would see her riding her bike. if she's riding in between drives. So I just wanted to echo the safety concerns that were raised too by the number of cars and the size of the cars. And like my other neighbors have mentioned, I've also seen people drop a car. It could be there a week, sometimes two. That has gotten a little bit better. But that's fairly common on our street, is for people to drop their cars and go, and then they come back days later. So I do hope, as my other neighbors have echoed, that we're able to get some kind of resolution, because when the other streets around us are permitted in some way, the spillover lives on our street, because there's nowhere else to go because the other streets are permitted. So just wanted to raise that because I hadn't heard that piece yet, and hope that there can be some kind of intervention for us who struggle with guests coming, repaired folks coming, and having a place to park during the day. So thank you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Tech team, if you could bring up Shauna Fajardo, that would be great. Shauna, just unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood, and go right ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Shana Fajardo, and I'm also on Summit Hall Road. And I certainly echo everything that's already been shared. My husband spoke. But one thing I do want to comment on is the piece related to equity. And I recognize that this is a public street, and we want to be equitable to our residents. But while this is a discussion around permits, I would also encourage the city to also make decisions around housing equity and what that looks like for those neighbors, because it is not equitable. We are paying taxes. We are paying for those roads. We are cleaning up those roads. That is not equitable. And those residents, there are so many, the overcrowding in the surrounding communities it's unsafe. And that is something that the city needs to work on. So while, yes, having accessibility to a public street, you may classify that as equity, you're not addressing the real equity issue that we have in our city. And I would encourage you to keep that top of mind as you're thinking about these issues, because parking on a public street, when you're talking about equity, is like, you want to talk about 1%, that's 1%.
Thank you very much. Tech team, if you could bring up Louis Cerny, that would be great. And Louis, if you can unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood, go right ahead.
Yes, this is Louis Cerny. I'm at 310 Summit Hall Road, and I very much want to echo the comments that have been made. I'm living on as I said, on the 300 block of Summit Hall Road. The problems with commercial vehicles parking here, just using it as a place to park their vehicles and not living in the area. The spillover parking that we have, and the problems have been well stated by others. And I just wanted to express my support for additional parking restrictions on the 300 block of Summit Hall Road.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Tech team, if you could bring up Leslie Shapiro, that would be great. Leslie, once you unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood, and go right ahead.
Leslie Shapiro. I live in Bennington on Long Draft Road. I just want to urge you to please grandfather the parking permit and to let you know how important it is to us. When we moved in over 40 years ago, there were no assigned spots for any of the homes here in the community. Eventually, they assigned 2 parking spots in front of everyone's townhouse. I front on Long Draft, as do 4 of my neighbors, and we're the only ones that do. We have 1 reserved spot a block away, and the other spot is in front of our homes here on Long Draft, with Gaithersburg being very accommodating and giving us parking permits. We're now, 4 of the homes have handicap parking stickers, and 3 of us are seniors. So maintaining that ability to park in front of our homes is really a very important part of our quality of life. So please do grandfather us.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Tech team, if you could bring up Sarah Orndorff, please. Sarah, once you unmute, just state your name and address or neighborhood and go right ahead.
Yes, my name is Sarah Orndorff, and I'm a longtime resident on Summit Hall Road. And I am very proud of my neighbors for showing up there tonight and bringing up our issues, which we have stated time and time again. And I'm not going to reiterate anything they said. I would challenge the council to drive up Brighton Drive from West Deer, make a right onto Summit Hall, and compare the difference between that street at all hours. They can park, they can have guests, versus our street. It is grossly unfair. We are surrounded by courts of 5 and 9 homes. They are allowed permit parking, but somehow we don't have the same access to the rows in front of us. And I know something was said about Brighton Terrace. If we get permit parking, and I'm not holding my breath because we've asked for this for years, it's coming for you next. We have a parking issue that is not being monitored by the city. Good luck finding parking on Friday. The commercial vehicles, they get parked, they're left here until Monday. You can't have guests. It's outrageous. And I just want the city to compare Brighton Drive to Summit Hall Road and tell me what the difference is between our neighborhood and that particular street. They've had permit parking for years. I understand now from tonight that that will all be grandfathered in, fully for them. But for those of us that are in a worse situation, because they jumped on it right when it was starting, what is the hope for us? And we need deadlines. We need to know that we've been heard, and we need to know that this is being proactively looked at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tech team, if you could bring up Al Danzy, that would be great. Al, just unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood, and go right ahead.
Good evening, Al Dancy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm on 300 block of Summit Hall Road, and I would like to first thank my fellow neighbors for joining in person and, of course, on Zoom. I'll be brief because, like others before me have said, these things are something that we all have shared, especially on this block. One of the concerns I have, which may go against some of my neighbors on other blocks, is that the grandfathering idea, or at least process that's now been approved. I'd be interested to say, or at least ask, I tried to get a records request to see if, in fact, I could understand what the other half of Summit Hall did successfully to have the permits in place that they have. Couldn't I get that, got a long list of what the city's streets are actually doing now, so that was kind of a waste of my time and money. But I'd be interested to see what Brighton and Summit Hall have done to successfully petition the city at that time to get restrictions like they have. And I'd like to mirror that for our block. I think that's the easiest way to look at what our block has been talking about during this meeting, without trying to reinvent or case out the block to see what's going on. We should be able to just kind of rubber stamp what they've done and put it on our block. With that, I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else on Zoom who'd like to speak? Just use the Zoom raise hand function. Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, there's a lot on the table. This is a complicated matter. I want to thank everybody here, and I want to thank everybody on Zoom who testified. 100%, you all made an impression. We knew it was a complicated matter. At least, particularly Ryan and I, having been here so long and having had this come up several times in different iterations. It's a complicated thing to try to do fairly and equitably across the city, give everyone the same sort of standards for petitioning the city for implementing a program, and then figuring out how to administer the program in the best way possible that works not only for us, but makes it easy for the public as well. I expect this to be an iterative process, meaning this is not going to be an overnight thing, but I can see with the staff recommendations and with the feedback from the public and what I sense from my colleagues here at the dais, that there's momentum here, and we're gonna have to work through it. But we look forward to working with everybody here and everyone who's watching to get the best thing done that we can for the city. Who'd like to? Neil, please.
So first of all, I'd like to echo the thanks for all the people that have come in and expressed themselves and shared what their issues are. And I guess I apologize for the fact that it's taken this long to address some of them, because I guess the pandemic kind of got in the way of a lot of things, but we need to move forward. And I think the direction that the staff has suggested in terms of centralization, computerization, setting up permitting on a recurring basis and things like that are very sound. I'm going to ask a hard question of my colleagues, which is, it seems like the root cause of a lot of these issues is spillover from private communities that we, unfortunately, at this point, don't really have jurisdiction over. It has just rankled me from the first time I heard about this a few years back, that the city required them to provide a certain number of parking spaces to support their residents, and then they are allowed to set up rules that make sure that a lot of those parking spaces don't get used and cause many of the issues that we've heard here today. I've talked to some of our state delegates about this to see if there's something that can be done, because they have jurisdiction over those folks and we don't. At this point, I haven't heard any traction, but I think we need to raise this as an issue. We may be swimming against the tides, because there's been some talk of removing parking restrictions from at least some areas, fortunately not on ours, but in some other parts. But I just think there needs to be a recognition that people need cars and need to be able to park them, and we need to make sure that we accommodate this. So these communities that restrict commercial vehicles from parking in spaces that they have, or that push residents out because they don't pay their fees, I'm very sympathetic to that, but it just means that you're taking your problem and giving it to somebody else. And it's not fair, and it needs to be addressed somehow. So if we can put that on our list of things to talk to the powers that be about, hopefully we'll get some ears and not just get ignored. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to associate myself with the comments of Councilmember Harris. I actually had this very conversation with John Schlichting after a council in the communities about the very issue of the decoupling of parking in private communities and how it's forcing drivers or parkers out into the neighborhoods. I want to kind of circle back just to the way that, Kevin, you began the conversation, and the whole point of that this all comes from a court case in Arlington County about the ability of homeowners to be able to park in front of their own homes. And I think we're hearing a lot of that tonight. And while they are public streets, the reason that those particular streets, neighborhood streets, are there is to get access to the homes. They're not, collector streets. So I think first and foremost, the people that are living here should have first right of refusal, if you will. And obviously the delay has caused some harm to a lot of our residents. And I think what staff is recommending is the beginning of the process to try to fix that. And I appreciate all of the people who came out and who were online to let us know. I mean, that we need to know the level of pain that you all are experiencing. And I think I think the entire 300 block of Summit Hall is represented tonight. So kudos, well done for getting out the testimony. So as this progresses, I agree with my colleagues that the idea of centralizing of enforcement, anything that's going to make it easier, faster. I heard people say that they're not able to get guest passes, so anything that we can do to allow people to request one, print it out and put it on their dashboard, make it kind of a low touch, I think is going to be important. The ability for scanners, I know there's going to be a price tag attached to that, but if the technology is there to allow our enforcement team to do it faster, then we can have fewer people doing more work. And I think that's going to be an important thing for us to do. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Lisa.
Thank you, Mayor. Kevin and Sharon, and I believe I'm preaching to the choir with what I'm about to say. So 300 block of Summit Hall clearly is an issue. But if we were to solve that problem, where do all those cars go? That's a lot of spillover. So we're going to lift this problem and create it somewhere else. So I'm sure you're looking at this holistically, not just to solve this problem on this street, but the broad issue of where are they coming from, where should they be, how do we enforce the bad parkers, or handle violation against bad parkers. Because my fear is that's a lot of cars from the testimonies that we've heard today. Where do they go? They're not going to not park somewhere. So just as a comment, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this, but it's a big issue.
Right.
Thank you. I just wanted to add two thoughts, Mr. Mayor. First, I agree with what Neil said. Councilmember Harris did engage in 2017 and 2018 in those discussions. I also engaged in those discussions with some of our state representatives to try and figure out what the solution was, and huddled with staff at the time to try and figure out what our legal options might be. And it's a real challenge because these condo communities that have excess parking capacity, which they're not using, are privately owned with privately owned parking spaces, and the city has just limited jurisdiction legally in terms of what it can do there. We talked about coming up with ways where we might incentivize. If we cannot require, then maybe at least we can incentivize, either with carrots or with sticks, to try and figure out how to get some of the condo communities that have excess parking supply to change their policies. And I think we need to continue thinking creatively to see what we can come up with, continue advocating to our state officials to see if there needs to be state legislation. I know that Councilmember McNulty and I have had this conversation on the sidelines as well in terms of what's legal and what we can do and what we simply, unfortunately, just don't have the legal authority to do in some cases. And that is extremely frustrating because we know that at least some of this spillover is being caused by that situation. We are well aware of it. We're continuing to think creatively and just want you all to know that. But it is a complicated legal challenge because those are private property. The next thing I wanted to mention is just in follow-up to the discussion of the issue of equity. I want to make clear my view, and I'm sure it's everybody else's view here as well, that equity does not mean that anybody should be sacrificing their safety, okay? So equity does not mean your safety, public safety gets sacrificed. Sometimes equity means convenience gets sacrificed, but to the extent that the stories that we've heard tonight from members of the public reflect real concerns about public safety, I want to echo what the lieutenant said. Please make sure you're calling us. If you're not calling the police department, whether it's the non-emergency or the emergency number, they have no way to collect the data to be able to act upon the data. And as much as it might be cathartic sometimes to express your concern on Facebook or express your concern in an email or on Nextdoor, which it can be, please also remember to call the police. Because if we don't have that data captured, we cannot properly allocate our public safety resources to make sure that you all are not sacrificing your public safety. Nobody wants that, and we will work hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And, again, this is an interesting conversation. It's something that arose just as I was coming on the council. I remember Tanisha's predecessor, Tony Tomasello, sweating beads as we were bringing up this conversation before. And we really didn't have the tools available at the time to take a holistic approach. And so at the time, the issue that was arisen, we addressed it based on the complaints that came in from the community. We did the best we could. We put rules in place at the time that, had ultimately had other people coming in and testifying, you took away our parking. So kind of what Lisa was talking about. And I remember describing at the time, a bunch of us were talking about it as like whack-a-mole. And so having the tools to take a holistic approach, and I'm looking at some of these maps here, and it looks like a lot of these programs developed over time kind of in the same ad hoc fashion. I think being able to take a holistic approach at this map, at the parking situations in these neighborhoods and not just on streets, and resolving them for our residents, I think is going to be very helpful to a lot of neighborhoods in our community. And so, this is a long time coming, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Rob.
Can I just ask a question, if you don't mind? I'm sorry. One of the questions, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but a place like Washington, D.C., which obviously has a lot more parking challenges, I think, than we do, and their signs are certainly a lot more confusing. But what they have there is the entire city is zone parking, and they have specific zones for specific areas. Is that even something that is on the table to eliminate that whack-a-mole where you have the entire city as zone, as permit parking, and then that way it's not a destination for people to be driving here and leaving their vehicles? Like I said, I'm not necessarily advocating, I'm just asking if that's being discussed.
I mean, we're open, that would be, if those, if we wanted to
It's
open
not
it up
the intent.
to the entire city.
It's not your intent, correct?
Correct. I mean, we're looking at, again, going back to the map, it looks like there's 1% of the areas now that are being impacted by parking. I don't think overall that the entire city has a parking issue. But I think we might hear some other feedback from community homeowners that would have to pay for parking on the streets when there's not necessarily a parking problem there. So, just another way to look at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so do you guys feel guided?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
Then I will. Anything more from staff?
No, just thanks to the team that's working on this very challenging, complex issue. So,
Okay.
thank you all.
All right. I will note that we have our next meeting. What is just see the dates. Just see the date of our next meeting should be April 3rd. Next regular meeting of Mayor and Council. I will note we do have the State of the City event coming up on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. at Asbury. And if you'd like to go, you need to you have to contact staff. It's free but ticketed. So please do. And until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.